to the Burn Up Podcast, where we discuss all things agile software development and delivery.
We will be giving you an honest take on tools and techniques. We'll share our experiences, debunk myth, and hopefully provide needed inspiration.
Hi, I'm Todd Anderson, Consultant Delivery Manager. I've done just about every job in IT, from tech support, programmer, network security, project and program management. I can't say I've done everything, but I've seen a lot.
And I'm Marcel digital consultant, business analyst and product owner. I've worked in digital before this even had a name, and since have been quite a bit around the block. And this is my way of giving back to the industry.
So sit back, relax, and settle in for this week's episode. All right, before we get started this week, just a plea and a quick announcement. So please share our podcast with anybody you think might be interested. That includes internal networks or Twitter or LinkedIn or whatever. And please do rate us. Rate us well, please, or let us know if there's something you don't like. That would really help us out. Spread the word.
And we'll also have a Ask Me Anything episode coming up. And as we're really bored writing letters to ourselves, if you have any questions that you are interested in discussing with us, please send us questions, which we will then include in the episode and answer.
And on with this week's episode.
Welcome to another episode of the Burn Up. Today, Todd and I will be talking about the role of the delivery manager or the Scrum Master. We'll do a separate episode on program management after this. So today we want to focus on the specifics of leading and managing a team. Todd, can you outline for us how you see the role of the delivery lead or the Scrum Master?
Yeah, so I think at the end of the day, a delivery lead or Scrum Master is there to, as it says on the tin, make sure delivery happens, right? And how you do that is typically by managing risk and removing blockers for the team.
So you're facilitating, right?
You're facilitating delivery. You're not necessarily doing the delivery yourself, although a lot of times I've had some hands-on experience actually writing some code to get some things out the door. But what your role there is to facilitate delivery at the end of the day. And what that really means is you sit in between the business and the team themselves, and a lot of times you're representing the business to the team, and you're also representing the team to the business. So in some ways they're kind of a shit shield, I'd say, to make sure that unnecessary things don't land on the team that come sometimes from outside forces. But you also want to make sure the team is aware of things happening in the business, so they can make decisions on their day-to-day. So really it's about removing these blockers, removing these distractions, identifying issues that could arise and managing them appropriately, making sure that it's well communicated to anybody that needs to know these issues might arise, and hope to manage it, talk to other teams, talk to stakeholders, and make sure things are clicking along. So it's really about the flow of delivery.
Mm-hmm. Something we should maybe talk about, as we said, we will do a separate episode about program management, but I think it would be worth quickly pointing out what's the difference between a program manager, a project manager, a delivery lead, and a Scrum Master. I think those four, because there are differences and they're kind of the same to a certain degree. So how would you understand those roles?
Yeah, so program manager, I think, is a more distinct role than the other ones.
Interesting. Okay.
Because a program manager is looking at an entire program of work. You're looking at multiple projects, and again, I think we'll touch on this in another episode.
Yeah.
But that's a way higher level.
So it's more strategic?
It's more strategic delivery. You're not necessarily getting into the day-to-day outcomes of a project, but you're making sure projects can operate. So instead of removing blockers for teams, you're removing blockers for entire projects.
So you're looking at value streams, or the outcome of multiple streams of work projects that happen under the hood, and you make sure that they all together, dependencies and whatever the connection points they have, that goes in the right direction and delivers stuff.
So you're trying to deliver an entire service or something, and you have outcomes at a program level So you're trying to make sure all the, you're still looking at blockers, you're still looking at dependencies. It's just that when you're bumping it up to that level.
Yeah.
And you're usually working with a whole group of stakeholders, a much higher level group of stakeholders, a lot more senior stakeholders typically. You're usually facilitating program management meetings or steercos, and you're making sure that that happens at a higher level. So, you're getting a lot more into strategic things. You're working with heads of operations,
Yes.
CTOs, COOs. You're working with the whole program to make sure that the organization is going in the right direction. So program management, I would set aside as something different. I would think that would be something that a more experienced delivery manager would get into eventually.
Yes.
It's usually a more experienced role because you're just tying together a lot more things. You're dealing with more senior people. So a delivery lead or delivery manager or project manager or whatever you call it, as opposed to a Scrum Master, is maybe a slight bump up from a Scrum Master. So maybe that does sit in between a program manager and a Scrum Master, in that you might be looking at more work streams within a team. So like maybe you go to Scrum Master. A Scrum Master is maybe looking at just one team's backlog,
right?
And they're trying to drive it through, right? And that might be a team of 10, 8 or 10 people or whatever. And just making sure delivery gets driven through.
So you're facilitating that team's day-to-day work, right? And,
yeah, Scrum Master. Whereas maybe a delivery lead or delivery manager, you might be slightly stepped. You might still be doing that work. You might be still looking at a team and driving that through, but you also might be elevated.
You might be orchestrating multiple teams as well, right?
Orchestrating multiple teams, right? But still within a program of work. So.
I mean, what I would also say is I haven't seen many Scrum Masters look at budgets, resourcing forecasts in great detail, whereas I think that's more the delivery lead project manager side.
I don't want to get in trouble here because I think I actually do think that can be used fairly interchangeably because I think some organizations do use Scrum Masters
in that way. Okay,
in that way. They might be delivery leads, but they call them Scrum Masters.
That's a good point.
Because they come from a Scrum background, right?
Yes, okay.
So if an organization has a Scrum background, they're more likely to use Scrum Master as a term to mean something more general. Whereas if you're just coming from a just Agile background or whatever, and you're using Lean or whatever, you might not even use the term Scrum or whatnot. I do think some Scrum Masters get into that delivery role. And there's a lot of overlap. And delivery leads also get into the weeds sometimes where you actually get into a team and you're actually looking at the board and depending on the size of the team or what you're doing, you're driving delivery at that story level.
I think it's interesting you say this because I've seen the extreme other end where a team didn't have a Scrum Master at all as such. It was just that some individual in that team, every sprint, a different individual would kind of facilitate and unblock for that team. So the Scrum Master role was something that would organically emerge out of that team, and someone would be like, oh, this week I'm helping the team, and the next week would be someone else. But I think what we need to be mindful of is that, and I think you would agree with that, is that what you need is a role, someone who helps the team on a day-to-day shop floor basis to facilitate, and if you have multiple teams and a slightly bigger project, say, or a combination of teams working against the product, you might need someone higher up to orchestrate those efforts. And the more complex this becomes, at that point you might need to think about having multiple people doing those roles because one person you can't be a developer facilitating your team, looking after budgets and some other teams as well. That just doesn't work, right?
Yeah, and I think it's good for team members to all have that delivery hat on and maybe try out the role because there could be developers that could be really good at delivery. A lot of times business analysts tend to wear that dual hat of business analyst, Scrum Master. And it's really good for people to be delivery focused. So I think having everybody aware of that skill and be able to play that role is really good. But it's important that somebody is playing that role. Yeah. I think that's the important thing from that sort of Scrum Master perspective. So I think it's really great when teams get involved because delivery is what it's all about.
Yes, right? There is a bit of a risk that some delivery leads or Scrum Masters might become kind of too commanding and, I think there is this balance to be found between, as you said, shielding the team, being kind of a servant to the team to a certain respect while providing guidance, but at the same time we still want our teams to be client-facing.
A servant to the team. You absolutely don't want to dictate to the team. The team is the one doing the work. You're trying to make sure that they can do that work. They're the ones that are best placed to decide how they do that work. So although you might have an opinion about how things go, you only have an opinion. You only have one voice in the team. And at the end of the day, you need to collaboratively decide how to go forward. Although you're managing the project, not necessarily the people.
So it's not a military structure where you issue commands, but you may issue strong guidance to help people if they're confused or they don't know what to do. But you're not determining, as you said, how they should work on a day-to-day basis. That's not what this is about, right?
And I've also been in situations where I've been a line manager as well as a delivery lead, but in my mind, they're kind of two separate hats. I mean, they still have a lot of overlapping aspects where you want to solicit feedback and have good culture and all that sort of stuff. But at the end of the day, you're a team member and you have a certain role on that team. You're not dictating how the team works.
Cool. Let's talk about what makes a good delivery lead or a good Scrum Master. What are personality traits or soft factors that we would expect someone in that role to have or to hold?
Typically, a good delivery manager, I think, has a varied experience. So myself, I came from a developer background, so that gives me a lot of empathy or understanding about what developers go through. It also gives me a little bit of technical chops to be able to sort of be a bullshit detector and sort of say, ooh, that doesn't sound quite right, or like it gives me, enough information to be a little bit dangerous, but I know that I'm not in depth, or I know I don't have the level of technology knowledge at this point that I used to, but at least I have an understanding. So when someone is talking tech to me, then I can understand what they're saying and move forward.
Yeah, and you can help them flush out risks and things they may overlook, right? You can challenge their thinking in a good way, not criticizing, but saying, have you thought about X, Y, and Z? Your team and the clients as well, and by that identify things that may go wrong, dependencies, and all these things.
Well, and also translate tech speak into plain English for the client. A lot of times that's something that I do. We might be talking about CI/CD, Kubernetes, clusters on the back end, and a lot of stuff like that, and I might need to explain, okay, this is why continuous delivery is important, this is why you want it, learn how to communicate well. Mm-hmm. Project management is a kind of lonely job because usually there's only one of them on a team. And maybe similar to a business analyst, yes. Sometimes you're more likely to have multiple business analysts, I think, than a delivery manager on a team. But you are kind of there, and what that means is that you really need to be good at soliciting feedback from your team members, because when you're making decisions about how best to move forward, you need to be a really good listener, number one, because if you're not able to listen to your teammates and get that feedback and listen to the client and whatnot, your perception or your mental model about what's currently going on is going to be skewed, and you might make bad decisions or say something stupid, and really that's not your intention. You don't want to do harm.
Well, it's also, I would imagine, if you go off on one on your own and you're like, I know best and I'm doing this, even if you were right, you will alienate your team, right? So it's important to listen to people and be inclusive, and even if they just confirm what you were thinking anyway. I think that's maybe. How do you work with your team on a daily basis? Is there anything about listening to people, and how do you find the balance line between extremely needy people and driving delivery? Is there any skill involved in?
I think you have to have a good feel for your team. I mean, there's different. Every team member is different, and I think it's super important to have a good relationship with everybody on your team. I think one of the advantages of having, managing a smaller team is that you can really have that one-to-one relationship,
yes.
and having feedback sessions and one-to-one, going out for coffee, having that relationship is really great. I have to admit that when the team grows to a certain size and it becomes too big, or you have a lot of offshore locations, that becomes really difficult to have that personal relationship and to even, really have that understanding about what motivates people on your team. And that does make it harder to manage at the end of the day. So, I do prefer working with smaller teams where I can have that direct, hey, how's it going? Hopefully everything's going okay, even personal issue or whatever.
Yeah.
And just being, really friendly because, at the end of the day, you have to trust each other, and building that trust is best done.
And happy people deliver better work, right? Absolutely.
Exactly.
A question I have is, you and I have both seen project managers who are just box tickers, right? They have their Gantt charts, maybe some junior even updates those. They just follow the plans and they have to-do lists and they tick off. They never really do any actual work. And I think it should be clear by now that we don't think that's what a delivery lead is about and what they should be doing, and that doesn't necessarily add value. How do you think about yourself? How do you prevent yourself from becoming a bureaucrat and a box ticker? Because I can imagine it's easy to fall into that trap, especially if the projects become complex and big.
Yeah, first of all, I want to say that I think traditional project management methodologies still apply. I don't care if your background is Waterfall, Prince 2, whatever, Scrum, Agile, like you're still managing risk, you're still managing dependencies, you're still doing status reporting, you're still doing people management, stakeholder management, and all those pieces and driving delivery. So a lot of those things, it doesn't matter what methodology you're using. So from one perspective, knowing those tactical things and be able to deliver those is still really important. So
yes.
So knowing that foundation of skills is super important.
Mm-hmm.
But like you say, I think it's the soft side of things is what is just as important as those actual box ticking things. So understanding how the team works, understanding how relationships work, understanding how stakeholders will react to something, understanding the politics of the situation is another really important thing. It's a good trait to have, is to know when to shut up and not say things, but also know when you need to press something and really drive a point home.
I've seen you, which is a really interesting work, because we've worked obviously together and for quite a while now. And I've seen you be very outcome focused and delivery focused, right? You want to, it seems like your main interest is in getting something out of the door where that is valuable and doing the right thing. Whereas I've worked with, this is more a couple of years ago, with other project managers who were focused on delivering along a plan or delivering within a framework. Is my perception right that that's how you think about things? Or?
Yeah, the proof's always in the pudding. Delivering, like that's the whole point. That's the whole point your team's working, is to get something out the door and deliver it, and as early and as often as possible, getting that value out the door. So yes, very delivery focused. I think that's really the guiding light, right? If you're not working towards delivering something, then you're really not doing the job.
And would you agree that you couldn't, if we're honest, care less about the plan you've just created if the plan needs changing and needs total changing because you have just found something out that changes context? That's exactly your job, right?
Okay,
it's not adhering to a plan that you have done in the past, and the plan is just a relatively irrelevant thing that helps you on the way, right?
I would say one of the big traits is you can't be dogmatic about it, right? And you have to look at the situation. You really need to pay attention. I can't stress that enough. I think that's so important for delivery managers to be continuously paying attention and don't get attached to a methodology or a way of thinking or a thought that you have. You really just need to be continuously paying attention about the situation at hand that day. So really what it means is you almost need to wake up every day and be like, what do I actually know? I think I know these things, but what do I actually know? What is the actual status of this project? Is there something bubbling under the surface that I haven't addressed? And you need to really pay attention to that and take it head on and start managing it as early as possible before small issues become really big ones.
How do you handle a day-to-day life? Because again, I've seen you jump on a project from sorting some compliance stuff out in one moment to helping team unblock some DevOps work to the next moment think about feature delivery, or the client has changed their milestones. How do you, because I think in the past with waterfall delivery, it was easier in the sense that you had a plan and you'd follow that plan and then you do a change request. So everything was a bit slower, right? It seemingly makes it easier. Your overall delivery isn't as good, no question, but in an agile world, how do you, I guess, prioritize your work? Or how do you know what to focus on in a world where things are constantly changing, constantly shifting? How do you not get confused?
Well, if you have a good handle on what your milestones are coming up and what the risks of the project are, it becomes really easy to identify the things like, okay, these 4 things need to be in place for me to meet this milestone. Maybe milestone B, there's a lot more risk there, so you might need to look at that earlier on, right? And you need to start putting the wheels in motion to sort of look forward and look at that. So as far as prioritizing my time, there's just the day-to-day, firefighting of sort of like, we need to figure this out so we can just get the next feature out the door.
Yep.
And because, the feature's been prioritized by the product ownership or whatever, and you just need to unblock that feature. So unblocking things is probably one of the highest priority things, but you also have to have that long-term view where you're looking to unblock something bigger that's coming down the line, where you need to line up a lot more dependencies for.
And how do you make sure that kind of the hygiene stuff happens? So we're onboarding James today. He needs to be onboarded in all those different systems. Or, I'm coming your way and like, dude, I think this or that needs looking at. There is something wrong with requirements, or we need a meeting with these stakeholders. All the hygiene stuff that happens behind the scenes. You need to do it. It's not that exciting. It's not high priority, but it needs to happen anyway. How do you handle that? Because it's easy, I think, to just postpone some of that stuff, and then at some point it becomes a problem.
Yeah, so I think if you're working with a well-run team, some of that hygiene stuff is just built into the sprint planning, right? So you might have sprint planning, yes. You have daily stand-ups, you have retrospectives, you have showcases and that sort of thing, and that's going to feed back in to a lot of that hygiene stuff. Mm-hmm. But, I do think the daily stand-up is probably a really good touch point to sort of really assess the day and sort of look at, you go around and somebody's blocked on something, okay, how can I help? And again, it's that servant leadership thing, is sort of like, how can I best help here? And you can't always get it right, Sometimes you don't get it right, or sometimes maybe you prioritize your time wrong, but you need to, that's why you need to keep constantly aware of what you're doing, when to cut something off, and then don't hesitate to cut off going down the wrong avenue when you need to focus on something else.
How do you tell team members to fuck off if they want something that's really not important right now? In the nicest way, but sometimes I think you have to do that, right? Where you're like, look, dude, I appreciate for you this is important, but in the grand scheme of things, how do you handle that?
I think basically what you just said. I think I have really no problems, like, sort of saying, like, I just don't think this is important. And like you say, give a reason for it, but it doesn't mean that it won't be important in the future, right? So I think it's really important to acknowledge somebody and acknowledge their thoughts and not just completely dismiss people and let them make the case. Mm-hmm. But you can also say, like, we have these other 5 things that are going on right now, and we might have to revisit this. I hear what you're saying, but that's the thing. Another thing I really want to touch on too is as far as a trait of project managers, and this might be an interesting thing to debate, I guess, is I think you have to have a gut feel for what you're doing. Sometimes you do have to follow your gut, and I think that people maybe want it to be more formulaic and want it to be like, if I follow Scrum verbatim, then I will never have to make a bad decision or really think about it. And that's not true. I mean, a lot of project management is anecdotal. What worked with you in one project may not work in the next project.
Yes.
Or one approach, you have a completely different set of people, a completely different team, a completely different approach is required. So what you really need to do is collect a toolbox of approaches and experience, and then you need to sort of say, something's not quite right here. You need to if something in your gut's saying something's not right, I'm not comfortable with this, you need to acknowledge it and act upon it, not just let it fester, because that usually is when things go off the rails.
I totally agree. I think there is a lot in there about, as you said, it's because it's anecdotal, there's a lot in about experience. So as you said, there are certain frameworks and methodologies that we can apply, but within those, we know we need to look at risk, and we know we need to look at priorities, but ultimately how you prioritize and what risks are important, that's contextual. That changes from project to project, from day to day. And I don't think there is much you can do to really formalize this. There is just experience in there, And as you say, a bit of gut feel as well sometimes. Otherwise, everyone would be we could teach perfect project management, and we can't. I think it's just not that straightforward.
Yeah, I mean, another thing you can try to do is try to reduce the variables. So, when you're trying to do problems, it's just kind of classic problem solving. What do I know, and how can I do the next smallest thing to get to where I want to go? Let's try not to take a bite out of the elephant or boil the ocean or whatever you want to say. Like, what is the next thing I need to do to get that thing done? Because, it's that whole journey of 1,000 miles.
Yes, agreed.
You need to reduce the variables down and just sort of look at what's right in front of you. So I think that can be helpful to allow you to triage that kind of stuff.
Definitely. As we talked about earlier, as a delivery lead, there is a lot of things to do, and you could be pulled in all sorts of directions. So for me, when I was delivery leading, and I'm really not that good at it, the biggest challenge was like getting organized. Knowing what to do, doing the right things and doing them in an efficient way. Are there any kind of tricks or tips you can share with our listeners?
Yeah, so getting organized is a tactical piece of knowing your tools, so stuff like Jira, or whatever project management tool you're using, making sure it's up to date, making sure it's well organized, it reflects the status of your backlog and delivery and all that sort of stuff, and reporting is working and all that sort of thing. But a lot of what I do, and this is probably a trait of good project managers, is just to have general personal organization. So going back to, how do you manage your time and that sort of thing, is what I do is I typically use getting things done type of methodology, and this is something maybe we can do a separate podcast on.
I think that's a bigger thing, but maybe quickly just outline.
The high level is what you do is you want to get all the things that you want to do in a single repository.
Right.
And then you want to sort of categorize it of things you want to do next, or things that you're delegating to other people, or things you want to do someday, or just file it away. So I use getting things done in a combination of sort of an inbox zero type methodology to make sure that I know the things that I'm doing. I'm sort of prioritizing those things that I'm doing, and I also don't have the stress. I don't have the stress that I think I'm forgetting that I'm doing something, because I know if there's something I need to do, I'll send it to myself, and I'll prioritize it, and it'll be captured somewhere.
So staying on top of things that are coming up at any point in time, that's, I guess, a key thing here, right?
So, it's like, I have to do a status report, and I need to talk to this person, and I need to prepare for a retrospective, and I need to talk to the one stakeholder or whatever. I need to travel somewhere, whatever. All those things I have listed in my sort of repository, which in my case is my email. Okay. And I, they're all captured somewhere. I know where they are. I can prioritize them and act on them.
Well, definitely have to talk about that thing you just said about the email, because I think, as you know, I think that's like bonkers. But you have been very successful with that, so I think that would be very interesting for our listeners, and to be honest, to me as well. Once I understood how you were managing this via email, I think this is a really cool way of doing it. But it sounds a little bit crazy if you don't know what you're doing.
Yeah, I know in the day of Slack and stuff, it sounds bonkers, but actually, I've worked it out over the years, and it seems to work well for me.
Yeah.
So we'll go into that at some point. Another thing about getting organized as a delivery manager is you really want to cover your ass and document everything, because there's always inevitably going to be a point in time where you're going to be asked something, or you'll be challenged on the way a decision you made or a way delivery happened, and you're going to need to produce documentation or go back in time and reconstruct how you got to that place. If things go well, hopefully that happens less often, but just sometimes things go wrong, and you really want to go back and say, hey, this is when I made a decision. This is when the product owner decided we should go ahead with this. This is when we were transparent about this and the risks that were involved, and these are the emails that were sent. And, I'm not saying that you should get all litigious about it, but you should have that in the back of your mind, that you're trying to protect yourself, you're trying to protect your team, and the organization you work with. You want to make sure everything's fairly represented. It doesn't mean you're not going to make mistakes, but you really want to document everything.
And I think it's really interesting to remember that even or especially in an agile methodology, that's important, because sometimes we feel like, agile is all about high trust, high empathy, we're all playing nicely, and yes, we are, until we don't. And then, as you say, you want to have this narrative where you can go back to the client and saying, these are the reasons why we did things. You agreed here, or we made you aware of this, that, and this is not about messing someone up or fucking someone over. This is just to be able to play the story back and move on from there.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
as you say, you need to have your story straight.
Yeah, because sometimes you even want to do a retrospective over something that went wrong or a timeline. And it's just good to have that documentation there.
Yeah. And I think also, do you think, I've seen this a number of times on our last project where we made a decision, we had more discussion about it, we reversed the decision, we then reversed the decision again, and we went round in circles and circles and circles, and at some point you have hit the same thing 3 times by now. And I think it's really good if you have the information in place to point out to all the stakeholders that you have been round in circles. And just present that and say, look guys, something is clearly going wrong here, we need to tackle this in a different way. And again, this is what this record keeping helps you with, right? And that's not a bad thing at all. You mentioned there tools you use. Let me ask you this first. Do tools matter? Does the specific tools you use matter? And if so or not, which tools do you prefer to use or you think everyone must use?
The concepts are more important than the tools, but I think tools do matter in that you need to be able to use them because otherwise things are just a lot more difficult in delivery. So probably the primary tool I use is things like email and Slack. Because you're communicating a lot, you're trying to work things out with different people, and so that's just knowing how to use those tools, if it's Gmail or whatever, just knowing how to use your email client and organize things in a way that makes sense. It's important to put time and effort in it if that's where you're spending most of your time.
Yes.
Now then you have project management tools such as Jira or Formerly Mingle or Pivotal Tracker or something like that. A lot of those I don't actually have a huge love for. They don't actually sometimes mirror the way I want to run a project, and then sometimes the tool itself is dictating the way that they
have to work.
That you have to work,
yeah,
and that's not the way you want to work. And I have to admit that I've had struggles with Jira in the past with that because it kind of doesn't have that extra level, and unless you pay for it, you always need 3 levels or 4 levels or something like that, and you only kind of get 2. So I think actually the former product by ThoughtWorks Mingle worked really well. Unfortunately, they discontinued it. So if anybody out there is running Mingle, please do release it as an open source project. It would be great because I'd like to use it again. But because it had the flexibility to create your own sort of hierarchy chains in a way that Jira doesn't.
I think there's an interesting point you just said there around the flexibility of tools, and I think you just need to be aware of what do you want to use a tool for, the constraints and the overheads that come with the tool, right? So generally speaking, a lot of the tools are kind of the same and it doesn't matter really, but if a tool becomes a problem for you because, like what we found with Jira, it's just a pain at the moment the way they set it up to just manage it behind the scenes, then maybe you should be thinking about using something different. Or if you have a tool like Slack or Skype or Zoom, and you can't video conference properly because your audio quality sucks, then maybe again that is a reason to move on to another tool. So I think it's more about using the tool to make your lives easier, and where it doesn't, maybe consider something else.
Yeah, it goes back to sort of being aware of what your day-to-day. Don't force something that's just not going to happen, right?
Yes.
If it's just not working, don't force it. But at the same time, you have to be practical, right? Like if the client's like you have to use cloud-based Jira and that's the only choice that you have, well, that's probably not a fight worth having, at least not in the beginning of a project and maybe ever, because at the end of the day, one tool is maybe just as good as the other, and you might have to work around a few things, but that's just the reality of project management.
That is a really good point, actually, that the clients have certain constraints, but at the same time also I think it's really important to understand who is the actual user of a tool. So quite often I think organizations think that the main user of Jira should be senior management to get an idea of progress, whereas I think Jira is for the development team to manage their work. And I think you need to be really, really clear who is the main stakeholder or the main user of a tool, and optimize the tool for those people and not abuse the tool and force someone, as you said, into the process of working that actually doesn't really suit them and makes their lives much easier.
Yeah, and then that kind of gets actually an overlap in your type of role as a product owner and delivery management, is that when you're communicating to senior stakeholders, you kind of want to use roadmaps and you want to use more abstract, larger concepts about your status. You don't want to necessarily be saying, team A is delivering 10 points a week, and team B is delivering 20, and team B is better than team A. Well, it's all relative. So, you don't want to be fighting, in the weeds, with senior management about the productivity of these low-level teams that can be optimized other ways.
Yep.
You want to be talking in higher-level roadmap terms. I mean, there's other things too, tools as far as just having a sort of arsenal of templates.
Yeah.
So, making sure you have roadmap plans or project plans or status report templates or risk issue dependency, raid logs, that sort of thing. It's good to just have some of those templates that you kind of build up over time in your back pocket, so when you spin up a new project, you can kind of pull one of those out and just sort of kind of set up a project in one go. So it's good to have those templates.
And these are largely the same for every project, right? I mean, these are easy because they don't change that much from project to project.
No.
Yeah.
Again, most project management is the same.
Yeah.
And you're probably going to start a project the same way every time. It doesn't mean that you won't deviate from the way you run it, but and then you'll develop more and more tools and different approaches and things like that. But it is good to have that feedback loop of, if you do develop a template or a log or something like that, then keep it in your back pocket for next time.
Correct, yes. Let's talk a little bit about, we said earlier that you see your role as facilitating, unblocking, making things easier for people to deliver. I think a big part is how to have the right team to do the job. How do you go about building teams? Because I assume as part of the delivery lead role, composing teams is a big part of your job, right?
Yeah, if not the biggest, really, because they're the ones doing the work. Because, at the end of the day, you want good people that can work well together, right? And because really you want them to be self-sufficient enough to really run themselves. The best thing you can do as a delivery manager is kind of work yourself out of a job
yes.
and not have to manage a team. You want to be managing the project and reducing the risk and removing the blockers. So having the right people in place is very important.
Yeah.
So that's initially having team selection being high quality, and luckily I'm fortunate enough to be working with organizations that sort of do a lot of that for me by selecting only good employees.
Recruiting the right people in the first place.
In the first place,
yeah.
Because if you have one bad apple, it can spoil a lot of things.
Yeah.
And I think that's the other piece, is that you have to recognize if a team member is not working, and it may not be any fault of their own, it might be personality conflicts, it just might be working in a different way that they're not used to or they don't like to work in. There's a lot of reasons something might break down. I think you have to be really upfront about that and cut people free from a team, or give them an opportunity to work on something else, and not. You want to make sure you're keeping an eye on the morale of the team and the mix of the team.
But I think we should also say, because maybe what you just said, and I totally agree with that, sounds maybe a bit harsher than you would act in reality. I think, am I correct in saying that if there is a colleague who isn't performing as well as they should, or we know they can, you would help them to improve their work in a better way, right?
I guess I'm not necessarily talking about an individual performance. I guess I'm more talking about where a team member wants to work in a different way than the team's working, and if you can't resolve that,
yes.
then maybe it's just best to now there is the other piece of it, which is what you said, is sort of like if somebody's actually underperforming and you recognize that, then yes, you need to have one-on-ones with that person, sort of do a feedback thing where you sort of say, this is what I'm observing, this is the effect on the team. At least this is what I perceive the effect on the team being, and then talk that out and coming up with a remediation plan or whatever comes next. But yeah, you want to give people the benefit of the doubt. You have no idea what is happening in people's personal lives or it's happening externally.
Well, even in the teams, within the teams, right? You observe from the outside to a certain degree.
Yeah. And people have their own things going on, and sometimes you just need to talk that out. And going back to the listening thing, sometimes you are just a confidant, and that's why it's so important to have one-on-ones with people. I think that's probably the number one tip as a delivery manager is set aside time to have one-on-ones with people, because that's really where a lot of this work's done. That's really a lot of this understanding about how these team dynamics are playing out, what's concerning people, and to hear about that early on, and to really be able to help people and be that servant leader, you need to have these one-on-ones with people.
So here's a question. I've recently, I don't know why, but become a little bit of agony aunt for some of my or our colleagues. And that's kind of very flattering that they come to you and they voice their work issues, private issues, concerns they have about their career and all that kind of stuff. And especially maybe if you're a bit older as well, younger colleagues come to you and they're like, hey, can you become a mentor and stuff? And that's all really cool, but at the same time, it can be draining and it can suck energy out of you. And especially if you as a delivery lead have like a team to look after. How do you handle that? Do you have any tips how you...
Well, I guess I don't mind, like what I kind of do is look for trends in some ways. So like if I'm having one, sadly I hadn't, our previous project kind of grew to the point where I wasn't really able to have one-on-ones with everybody, and then I think it did kind of suffer for that, so I'll hold my hand up there.
Well,
but it just kind of shows the importance of it.
Yeah.
When I do set aside time, and what I used to do is I literally would block out time every sort of 3 weeks. 3 weeks kind of felt about right. Like 2 weeks seemed too often, and 4 or 5 weeks seemed too far away.
Great.
So about every 3 weeks, I would put something in a calendar, specifically in everybody's calendar. I'd have one-on-ones with. You just block out like nearly a day or a half a day or whatever of just one-on-ones back to back, and it's tiring.
Yeah.
But what you can start seeing when you look at that is sort of trends. So maybe your delivery lead sort of brings it on, I don't like the way automated testing works, and then you might hear it from a couple other people, and you're sort of like, well, wait a minute, this is something that, something that's really affecting people, or there's some dynamic there where, someone's really confident about something, and then it's kind of interesting because you might hear something from one person, and then if you have a one-on-one with somebody else that they were talking about, you can kind of bring it up sort of behind the scenes, sort of like saying, I heard that you're really interested in doing this, but, other people are pushing back on that. Like, why do you think that is? Do you think that's true? And again, it's asking probing questions and leaving it open to the other person to feedback.
So we've talked about personality traits, we've talked about like the tools you use, and, the good teams are really important. I think we've touched on this earlier already, that managing risk is a key thing, because this is where things go wrong, right? How do you go about, knowing whether the things are that may trip a team up, and then what do you do about them?
Yeah, when we engage on a project, we usually have some sort of inception type phase or discovery phase with some inception workshops. And part of that is we build in a RAID session, or RAIDs is risk, assumptions, dependent issues, and we build a session in to specifically try to surface those, because usually we're walking into a situation where there's an existing estate, or there's an existing project running, or there's a new project spinning up and it's replacing an old one that had issues. There's all sorts of things that can trip up a project. So you want to surface these risks really early. So we usually start out in discovery, having a RAID session, and that is as simple as kind of like getting the stakeholders together, giving them some post-it notes and saying, hey, let's just, if you have any risks, issues, assumptions, dependencies,
what concerns you?
Just put
what
them up
are the
on
things
the wall.
You're worried about?
Let's put them up on a wall and let's talk through them as a group, And then ultimately what I like to do is I would like to boil those risks into a risk log. So I actually have a risk register, which is just kind of a good hygiene thing to do. It is, kind of an old school thing to do, but it's also a good cover your ass thing to do, because ultimately you want to be able to take that risk register and review it on a periodic basis, maybe once every couple months, or once a month, once every couple months. It depends. And you actually go through those risks, and you want to make sure somebody owns them. You want to make sure that you have, either you accept them or you have a mitigation strategy that's in line with what the organization's thinking. and you want to make sure any actions happen that are recorded, and you want to be able to close them, or some risks turn into issues. So just for clarity's sake, a risk is something that could happen in the future, and an issue is something that's currently happening. So that's the difference between a risk and an issue.
Yes.
So issues in some ways are more immediate because they're more reactive. You have to do something now, whereas a risk can be sort of mitigated in the long term.
Yeah. Yep.
So having that risk log is pretty useful in going back to it. And then again, keeping on top of things on a day-to-day basis when risk is risen through retrospectives or showcases or whatever, make sure it gets fed back into the log.
Mm-hmm.
And one other thing too is that once you do surface those risks, you want to make sure risky things get addressed earlier in a project. So
yes,
you might have a backlog, and you might have a few features that are hot button features and whatnot, but you might want to do some of the riskier ones earlier on because you want to remove that risk. Again, it's about kind of reducing the variables. You might want to play a spike or something to sort of say, how am I going to prove out this technology or reduce that risk to de-risk the stories? And this is maybe more something that again, is in the product owner wheelhouse, but from a delivery perspective, you want to reduce risk early.
Totally agree. I think the problem with this is that as human beings, we quite often want to do the quick wins first and postpone the hard stuff, which means that quite often we postpone risky things, and that, as you said, is not the right approach. You should do the risky things early, because if you already fuck up there, then maybe there is no point in proceeding, or you think you are on track delivering something, and then right before go live you find out that you can't integrate into this important system and everything is out of the water. So you're absolutely right, you need to do these things early, and there's lightweight techniques of mitigating risks, and as you said, proof of concepts, these kind of things. But I think, I feel like I have to force myself to do the risky, the hard things first. It doesn't come naturally, I think. I think what comes more naturally is to do the easy stuff first.
And that's always the sort of misconception people have, is sort of like, if something's short or something like that you should, it's only going to take me a day to do that, so I'm just going to do that next. And I think that because you want the quick win, right? You want to put one in the win box, and you want to be able to say, hey, we're making progress by doing that short, easy thing. But it might not be the right thing to do. Even something that takes one day and a risky thing takes 5 days. Well, maybe you should get it started on that risky thing and take those 5 days, hit on the chin. But at least you'll know whether you have something viable at the end of it. And again, playing spikes and things like that, doing throwaway code and just sort of saying, okay, I have this really risky feature, and I don't know how this integration is going to work with this technology. Well, just playing a spike, which is a spike's a small piece of work that you do that might be a throwaway piece of work that just to prove out the technology works. So you just want to prove that the integration works. You're not necessarily writing production code. You're just proving that it works, and that then becomes information that you can put into the story later on as acceptance criteria or an approach to.
I mean, these days as product people, we talk a lot about like forming a hypothesis and doing an experiment as part of delivering something. And I think there is a hypothesis that, we can easily integrate with this system, and then you run an experiment of whether you can actually do that. And the only thing you might do is, integrate with the database and bring up a single field and show it to someone on a screen. And that may be your entire experiment. And yes, you can do this, and then you can get on with the normal life of delivering something.
Yeah, and again, it's that thought about, I want to break down the variables. I want to reduce the variables, so what I know and what I don't know, gets thinner. I want to know more and make decisions, based off things I actually know.
So we've already touched on retrospectives. What I would like to understand a little bit more, how does your day-to-day work look like at a very top level, and then how does your work over the cadence or along the cadence of a project look like? What are the things you do? What are the things you get involved with?
Yeah, so up front in the project, again, we start out with usually discovery and inception. So a delivery lead or someone like that would probably be involved in that, because again, you're trying to figure out what the project is you're trying to deliver and having a good basis for that. Then you sort of transition to a phase of actually delivery where you get more into an iterative development phase. So that's where you start playing your sprints, and you start actually delivering things. In between there, you might do sort of an iteration zero type thing.
Where you wrap up and check your team and
put together tooling, CI/CD pipelines, all that sort of stuff, and have the team actually figure out, the method they're going to use to deliver, technologies they're going to use to deliver. But once you're in an iterative process, you probably start with maybe sort of more of a release plan that might come out of discovery, where you're looking at your minimum viable product or your first release, second release, that sort of road mapping thing. So once that's facilitated, and again, this is working with product owners and stakeholders, and the delivery lead isn't necessarily running those sessions, but they're definitely sitting in those sessions as a stakeholder, because whereby the backlog is kind of the menu of things we want to do, the feasibility of actually doing it is where the delivery manager kind of comes in, and they need to coordinate the effort.
Yes, and I think you're also kind of, in the nicest way, enforcing that all these things happen, because I think I've realized this myself, that in the heat of the fight, when you deliver daily on a day-to-day basis, it's very easy to skip a demo, skip a retro, just because you have more important things to do. And then you are 8 weeks into the project and you haven't done any of those good things. So I think it's kind of, I guess the delivery lead sometimes is the guardian of best practices, right? And you make sure that all these things that really need to happen as hygiene factors do happen, right?
Yeah. I mean, the delivery lead is the annoying guy that puts stuff in everybody's calendar on a regular basis to make sure that those things happen. And it is really important to make sure that those ceremonies happen. So a delivery manager is going to make sure, like something like a sprint planning happens. It might not be true that delivery manager facilitates it. It's probably going to be a business analyst playing stories back to the team. There might be some estimation or something like that. But the fact that it happens is kind of on the delivery manager. Delivery manager is usually facilitating some sort of daily stand-up, and that includes, making sure it's short, making sure people don't waffle on, making sure people stay on track, making sure any blockers are addressed afterwards, and that sort of thing. So very much a facilitator role there. Delivery manager usually runs retrospectives, that's not always true. I mean, it's kind of good to have different team members run retrospectives, and everybody should really have a hand in that, but to make sure it happens and whatnot, and also kind of the MC for showcases. So you do a lot of facilitation, a lot of MC type work. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you are that person that's making sure the wheels are turning and smoothly and efficiently. And it's really about feeding those efficiencies back in. So in retrospectives, you get actions out of that. You want to feed that back in the team and try to work more efficient.
And I think this is a really good point, because what I've seen you do really well is that it's not just putting something in the diary, it's also thinking about, like, okay, last time we did a retro this way, that didn't go that well. How can I do a retro this time to make it even better? And then, as you said, outcomes, not just assigning things and then ticking boxes if people have done stuff or not done, but really making things that are either actioned or sometimes actioning them yourself, but really helping kind of drive these actions and really add value beyond just being a PA for everyone. That's not what this role is about at all. It's adding far more value.
Yeah, and that's a good point about actions. Like, you really want to put an owner on an action. And sometimes when you have an action, sometimes the action might be too grand to actually action. So what you really need to do is break that action down into what the next thing is. So if the action is to revamp your CI/CD system, that's not a feasible action. Nobody can own that. But somebody can own the next step of setting up the meeting to be able to start tackling that.
Yes.
So it's like chunking it down and giving an owner to that action. That's an important thing to do.
So how does one become a delivery lead, Scrum Master, or more specifically, how did you get into that role?
Yeah, so I got into it because I was a developer, and there was a need on the team for some sort of project management. I didn't really know what project management was.
Yes.
So I was working at a university at the time, so I'm like, I want to be a project manager or play that role.
Yes.
So I literally went to a project manager class where they taught, basically I was in there with people constructing buildings and doing all sorts of very, very waterfall-based things, and a lot of it was focused on learning Microsoft Project, so Gantt charts and that sort of thing. And it was enlightening. I got a big, thick binder out of it that I probably never necessarily looked at again. But it did open my eyes to like, oh, okay, wait a minute, this is a thing, and there's a method to it. And again, it's about managing risk and all these things. It doesn't matter if you're building a building or if you're building software, you have these common concerns. So what I did is I tried to apply that to software with varying success, because I think it was too heavyweight. Agile is a better way to go, because you need the advantage of software is that you can keep iterating on things where you can't do that when you're building an apartment building or a house or something. So once I got that experience and then eventually I ran my own company, I was able to sort of bring in that business side of running a company in with sort of where I had goals that I had to get done.
Yes.
With kind of some of this development and project management. I brought it all together, and then you kind of evolved out of there. So eventually I got into Agile through a small bespoke software development house that I was working at in Winchester, and that's where I kind of was exposed to Agile, and then took it from there. So
you learned basically, initially by this course you did, but then by doing and by working with other good people. What do you make of certifications? We all know there is the Scrum Master certification, there is SAFe, there is Prince 2, PMI, all that kind of stuff. What do you make of those? Are they helpful, important?
I mean, I am Prince 2 certified, or at least I was. I don't know.
It expires, doesn't it? It expires for more money.
But I don't have any problems with that. I mean, we were actually just talking earlier that having that culture of continuous learning is really important in many ways. And who cares about pigeonholing, like, oh, I don't do waterfall, or I don't do this or that, or I don't do Scrum, I only do Lean and Can't. That's just a stupid way to look at the world. I think, how are you going to do Agile transformation if you don't understand where somebody's coming from in a waterfall sense? And so like the important thing is having the continuous learning. Maybe having the actual the actual certificate at the end of it is less important to me than.
I think it helps possibly getting a job in some cases on the CV,
I mean, there are definitely jobs that are asking for Prince 2 certification. So don't get me wrong. Maybe having some of those key ones and being selective about that. Don't just get any random certification from Joe Smo. Actually think about the jobs that you're trying to target and get those actual, Prince 2 is an actual thing in the UK at least, and in America I think it's PMP. Like those are actual real things that people actually put stock in. So those are ones that you might want to shoot towards. But those also cost money and whatnot. So if you can get your company to pay for you to go on the training and pay for certification, I would definitely suggest doing that. But
I should actually say it's interesting what you said about learning, because I did a DSDM certification a couple of years ago, or longer now, and most people don't even know what DSDM is, and it's not highly recognized. But just doing the training course and being exposed to new ways of thinking, and I'm referring a lot back to DSDM just in my day-to-day work, because it's a really good approach. It's a halfway house to a certain degree, between super agile like XP and Scrum, and then kind of something which is a bit more waterfall. And that opened my eyes to how you can bring the two worlds, waterfall and agile, together. So to your point, sometimes it's not about the final outcome, your stamp or your seal of approval, but it is the being inspired, getting new ideas and looking at things in a different way. So if you had a junior project manager, Scrum Master, and they just want to become more experienced, what would you say to them? What's the best way of getting to a level like where you are, like where you're like...
I think experience. It really does come down to experience. Like so many roles, it's seeing a lot of things. So having that sort of journeyman attitude, I think if you're repeating the same day, over for 10 years in a row, you're probably not going to get a lot out of that. I think some of the advantage I have being in consultancies is that I see a lot of different verticals. I see a lot of different types of projects. You take a lot away from all those experience, and it doesn't mean that you're never going to make mistakes all the time, or I figure out better ways to handle things. But you got to start somewhere. Like if you are a developer and you want to get into it, or if you're a BA, you want to get into it, or if you're interested in it, you have to try it. You have to take the role, or even just try to manage your own time at home. Like just actually just think about delivering. At the end of the day, that's what it's about. It's like, how can I do this better, like more efficiently and better? And you have to have that mindset of doing that and getting experience doing it however you can, and just having that mindset of like not getting too attached and having that attention mindset. Just keep practicing that and getting the experience in front of customers. And and there will be hard times where you're going to get in a situation where things didn't go well, and you're going to defend yourself, and you're going to say something stupid, and you're going to make those mistakes, and that's okay. It's
that's
okay.
Great. You learn from
Everybody
that, right?
does that, right?
Yes.
Like I've done that. I'm sure you've done that.
Well, totally.
Where you sort of like been overly defensive, and it's really easy when you're younger to be overly defensive about things. And I think as you grow older and more experienced, you become less defensive about it, and it's more matter of fact. It's sort of like you're doing the best you can with what you have.
Correct.
Yeah. So I think so. It's just practice and experience, like anything.
And I don't think there's a problem with making mistakes, as long as you don't repeat them. You learn from them, and next time you're trying to do better, and just keep going from there. So to wrap this up then, Todd, is there anything you think people should take away from this discussion?
Yeah, I think in closing, I would say, to use an old Zen proverb, is, this too shall pass. It's a great...
Yes.
It's just kind of a great statement, because, the highs and the lows, you don't want to get too attached with them, because they'll pass. Things change. And it's not the end game. And it's really good to have that mindset as a delivery manager, not to just always look at right in front of you, the tactical thing, but, things will pass, and that's a good thing.
Yes, I agree.
So with that, I'd say, if you're interested in being a delivery manager, give it a go. It's it can be rewarding, and it's fun too. So give it a try. Let us know if you have any comments, questions, and love to hear from you. Take care.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
That's it for today's episode. Have a look at our show notes with related information and details on how to get in touch at theburnup.com. We are listener driven, so please do send us your questions, comments, and ideas for new episodes.
We're both practitioners and are happy to discuss interesting opportunities from consulting to coaching to getting involved in actual projects. For inquiries, please visit burnupmedia.com. This podcast is produced by Burnup Media Limited under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives 4.0 license, which means you can share it as long as you give credit, but you cannot change it or make money of it.
Until next time, thanks again for listening, and have a wonderful day.